I felt his hand, lighter than a moth's wings, brushing my damp hair back so that his lips could touch the hollow of my ear. Much, much easier, I said, trying to exhale. Hmm. So, I was wondering, I began again, but his fingers were slowly chasing my collarbone, and I lost my train of thought. Yes, he breathed. Why is that? My voice shook, embarrassing me. Do you think? I felt the tremor of his voice on my neck as he laughed. Mind over matter? I pulled back. As I moved, he froze, and I could no longer hear the sound of his breathing. We stared cautiously at each other for a moment, and then, as his clenched jaw gradually relaxed, his expression became puzzled. Did I do something wrong? No, the opposite. You're driving me crazy, I explained. He considered that briefly, and when he spoke he sounded pleased. Really? A triumphant smile slowly lit his face. Would you like a round of applause? I asked sarcastically. He grinned. I'm just pleasantly surprised, he clarified. In the last 100 years or so, his voice was teasing, I never imagined anything like this. I didn't believe I would ever find someone I wanted to be with, in another way than my brothers and sisters. And then to find, even though it's all new to me, that I'm good at it, at being with you. You're good at everything, I pointed out. He shrugged, allowing that, and we both laughed in whispers. But how can it be so easy now? I pressed. This afternoon, it's not easy, he sighed. But this afternoon I was still undecided. I am sorry about that. It was unforgivable for me to behave so. Not unforgivable, I disagreed. Thank you, he smiled. You see, he continued, looking down now, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough. He picked up one of my hands and pressed it lightly to his face. And while there was still that possibility that I might be overcome, he breathed in the center of my wrist. I was susceptible until I made up my mind that I was strong enough, that there was no possibility at all that I would, that I ever could. I never seen him struggle so hard for words. It was so human. So there's no possibility now? Mind over matter, he repeated, smiling, his teeth bright even in the darkness. Wow, that was easy, I said. He threw back his head and laughed, quietly as a whisper but still exuberantly. Easy for you, he admitted, touching my nose with his fingertip. And then his face was abruptly serious. I'm trying, he whispered, his voice pained. If it gets to be too much, I'm fairly sure I'll be able to leave. I scowled. I didn't like the talk of leaving. And it will be harder tomorrow, he continued. I've had the scent of you in my head all day, and I've grown amazingly desensitized. If I'm away from you for any length of time, I'll have to start over again. Not quite from scratch, though, I think. Don't go away, then, I responded, unable to hide the longing in my voice. That suits me, he replied, his face relaxing into a gentle smile. Bring on the shackles. I'm your prisoner. But his long hands formed manacles around my wrist as he spoke. He laughed his quiet musical laugh. He laughed more tonight than I'd ever heard in all the time I spent with him. You seem more optimistic than usual, I observed. I haven't seen you like this before. Isn't it supposed to be like this? He smiled. The glory of first love and all of that. It's incredible, isn't it? The difference between reading about something, seeing it in the pictures, and experiencing it. Very different, I agreed. More forceful than I imagined. For example, his words flowed swiftly now, as I concentrated to catch it all. The emotion of jealousy. I read about it 100,000 times. seen actors portray it in 1,000 different plays and movies. I believed I understood that one quite clearly, but it shocked me, he grimaced. Do you remember the day that Mike asked you to the dance? I nodded, though I remember that day for a different reason. The day you started talking to me again. I was surprised by the flare of resentment, almost fury that I felt. I didn't recognize what it was at first. I was even more aggravated than usual that I couldn't know what you were thinking, why you refused him. Was it simply for your friend's sake? Was there someone else? I knew that I had no right to care either way. I tried not to care. And then the lines started forming, he chuckled. I scowled in the darkness. I waited, unreasonably anxious to hear what you would say to them, to watch your expressions. I couldn't deny the relief I felt, watching the annoyance on your face, but I couldn't be sure. That was the first night I came here. I wrestled all night while watching you sleep, with the chasm between what I knew was right, moral, ethical, and what I wanted. I knew that if I continued to ignore you as I should, or if I left for a few years until you were gone, that someday you would say yes to Mike, or someone like him. It made me angry. And then, he whispered, as you were sleeping, you said my name. You spoke so clearly. At first I thought you woken, but you rolled over restlessly and mumbled my name once more, and sighed. The feeling that coursed through me then was unnerving, staggering, and I knew I couldn't ignore you any longer. He was silent for a moment, probably listening to the suddenly uneven pounding of my heart. But jealousy is a strange thing, so much more powerful than I would have thought, and irrational. Just now, when Charlie asked you about that vile Mike Newton, he shook his head angrily. I should have known you'd be listening, I groaned. Of course. That made you feel jealous, though? Really? I'm new at this. You're resurrecting the human in me, and everything feels stronger because it's fresh. But honestly, I teased, for that to bother you? After I have to hear that Rosalie, the incarnation of pure beauty, Rosalie was meant for you? Emmett or no Emmett, how can I compete with that? There is no competition. His teeth gleamed. He drew my trapped hands around his back, holding me to his chest. I kept as still as I could, even breathing with caution. I know there's no competition, I mumbled into his cold skin. That's the problem. Of course Rosalie is beautiful in her way. But even if she wasn't like a sister to me, even if Emmett didn't belong with her, she can never have 1/10, no, 1/100th of the attraction you hold for me. He was serious now, thoughtful. For almost 90 years, I walked among my kind, and yours, all the time thinking that I was complete in myself, not realizing what I was seeking, and not finding anything, because you weren't alive yet. It hardly seems fair, I whispered, my face leaning on his chest, listening to his breath come and go. I haven't had to wait at all. Why should I get off so easily? You're right, he agreed with amusement. I should make this harder for you, definitely. He freed one of his hands, released my wrist, only to gather it carefully into his other hand. He stroked my wet hair softly, from the top of my head to my waist. You only have to risk your life. Every second you spend with me, that's surely not much. You only have to turn your back on nature, on humanity. What's that worth? Very little. I don't feel deprived of anything. Not yet. And his voice was abruptly ancient, full of ancient grief. I tried to pull back to look at his face, but his hand locked my wrist in an unbreakable hold. What? I started to ask when his body began to alert. I froze, but he suddenly released my hands and disappeared. I narrowly avoided falling on my face. "Lie down," he hissed. I couldn't tell where he spoke from in the darkness. I rolled under my quilt, falling up on my side the way I usually slept. I heard the door crack open, as Charlie peeked in to make sure I was where I was supposed to be. I breathed evenly, exaggerating the movement. A long minute passed. I listened, not sure if I heard the door close. Then Edward's cool arm was around me under the cover.